remember the exact way the fluorescent lights hummed in the doctor's office, a sterile, indifferent soundtrack to the moment my world fractured. The word cancer landed not with a bang, but with a sickening, silent thud in the pit of my stomach. Ethan's hand was in mine, his grip tight, his knuckles white. He turned to me, his eyes shining with what I truly believed was unwavering devotion. "We'll fight this together, Lena," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. I love you." For 3 weeks, he was my rock. He came to every appointment, held my hair back when I was sick from the initial tests, and slept in the uncomfortable chair next to my hospital bed. Then, the chemo began. The real fight. The poison meant to save me began its work, and my body started to rebel in the most visible, vulnerable ways. My skin took on a gray pallor, and my hair, my long, dark hair that he loved to run his fingers through, began to come out in clumps on my pillow. One morning, I stood in the bathroom, a handful of it lying lifeless in my palm, and I saw the shift in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was a slow-burning fear, a revulsion he couldn't hide. The man who swore to fight with me was suddenly looking at me like I was a ghost, a premonition of a suffering he couldn't bear to witness. His promises, so fervently made, began to feel as fragile as the strands of hair falling from my scalp. That was the day I learned love can vanish faster than health. I came home from a particularly brutal round of treatment, my body aching, my spirit hanging by a thread. All I wanted was the comfort of our bed, the solid warmth of his presence beside me. The house was silent, an odd, heavy silence that felt wrong. I called his name, my voice weak, echoing through the rooms. No answer. I moved slowly to the kitchen for water, and that's when I saw it. A single piece of notebook paper, torn roughly from a spiral binder, left on the cold granite countertop. No envelope, no flowers, no final gesture of care. Just a note the handwriting rushed, almost frantic, as if he couldn't get the words out or himself away fast enough. "Elena, I'm so sorry, I can't do this. This is too hard, I hope you understand. Ethan." I read it once, then again. And a third time, the words blurring as hot tears welled in my eyes. That was it. No, I'll always love you. No, be strong. Not even a proper explanation. The man who had vowed eternity, who had shared my bed and my dreams, was gone. He hadn't even had the courage to say it to my face. He had fled before sunrise, leaving nothing but this pathetic scrap of paper and a void of betrayal so vast I felt myself falling into it. In the days that followed, the silence in the house became a physical presence. It was a heavy blanket, smothering me, pressing down on my chest until I felt I couldn't breathe. Every corner of our home was a landmine of memory. His favorite mug, still in the dishwasher. The jacket he'd forgotten, slung over the back of a chair. The bed, which I now had all to myself, felt impossibly large and empty. I would curl into a tight ball on my side, clinging to the edge, the space where he used to sleep a yawning, cold chasm. The loneliness was a different kind of sickness, one the chemo couldn't treat. The periodic beep of the IV pump at the hospital, which had once felt so isolating, was now replaced by the deafening quiet of a home that was no longer a home. My tears were endless, a silent river of grief for the man I lost, the future that was stolen, and the terrifying fight I now faced completely alone. I was a ship adrift in a vast, dark ocean, and the one person I thought was my anchor had cut the line and sailed away. One morning, I forced myself to stand before the bathroom mirror. I had been avoiding it, afraid of the stranger my illness was creating. What I saw made my breath catch. A pale, gaunt face stared back, the skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. My eyes, once bright and lively, were now sunken and hollow, shadowed with exhaustion and pain. And my hair, it was a patchy, tragic mess, thin enough to reveal the scalp beneath. "I don't recognize her," I whispered to the empty room, my voice a raspy, unfamiliar sound. This wasn't me. This was a ghost, a victim, a walking testament to disease and abandonment. A fresh wave of despair threatened to pull me under. But then, as I stared into the depths of my own hollow eyes, I saw it. A flicker. A tiny, stubborn spark of defiance deep within the darkness. It was anger. It was hurt. But most of all, it was a refusal to let this be the final picture of Elena Vargas. This woman in the mirror was weak, yes. She was broken, but she was still here. She was still breathing. And beneath the profound weakness, a fire was slowly, painfully beginning to form. Her name was Leela. She was my oncology nurse, a woman with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hands that were both strong and gentle. She saw through my brittle facade, saw the bottomless well of grief I was drowning in after Ethan left. One day, after I'd been particularly withdrawn, refusing to eat or even look at her, she pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She took my hand, her grip firm and real. "Alina," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the fog of my self-pity. "Listen to me. People leave. It's a terrible, painful truth of life. Husbands, wives, friends, sometimes they can't handle the storm." She leaned closer, her gaze intense. "But strength doesn't leave. It's buried deep inside you, and it's waiting for you to decide to dig it up. It's the one thing no one can take from you unless you hand it over." Her words were like a key turning in a rusty lock inside my soul. For the first time since the diagnosis, since the note, since the haunting reflection, I felt a shift. It wasn't a miraculous healing, but a tiny, crucial crack in the wall of my despair. Someone saw me. Someone believed I was still in there. And for the first time, I started to believe it too. The day my final chemo treatment ended was not a celebration. It was a quiet, exhausted surrender. I was a hollowed-out shell, my body a map of scars and bruises, my spirit frayed at the edges. The woman who walked out of the oncology ward was physically unrecognizable from the one who had entered months before. But inside, something fundamental had changed. The fire Nurse Leela had helped ignite was now a small, steady pilot light. I knew I couldn't go back to my old life, to the empty house that echoed with Ethan's ghost. So I began the slow, painstaking work of building a new one. I enrolled in online courses for nutrition and wellness, subjects that now felt deeply personal. And in a move that surprised even me, I started volunteering at the very same hospital ward where I had almost given up. I would push the tea cart. My own bald head a silent badge of solidarity with the patients I served. I'd offer a warm blanket or just a listening ear, saying, "I've been in that bed." I saw the fear in their eyes and recognized it. In helping them find a moment of comfort, I was stitching together my own broken pieces. Karma was quiet during this time, a patient observer. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply learning how to live again, one small, deliberate act of courage at a time. Months into my recovery, on a night when the loneliness felt particularly sharp, I made the mistake of scrolling through social media. My thumb froze mid-swipe. There he was, Ethan. His profile picture was a professional, sun-drenched photo of him beaming, his arm wrapped tightly around a beautiful, smiling woman with cascading blonde hair. Her left hand, resting on his chest, flashed a diamond that caught the light. The caption read, "She said yes, ready to spend forever with my best friend." The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It hadn't even been 2 years. The man who couldn't handle the in-sickness, part of his vows was already building a new in health forever with someone else. A familiar, old pain, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I felt the sting of his betrayal all over again, fresh and raw. But then, something unexpected happened. The pain didn't metastasize into the consuming despair it once would have. It simply was. I looked at his smiling face, at her radiant joy, and I felt a profound sense of distance. He was a character from a past life. I closed the app and placed my phone face down on the table. Looking out my window at the quiet night, I whispered a phrase that surprised me with its sincerity. "May life teach you gently, Ethan." It wasn't a blessing. It was a release. 2 years to the month after my clean bill of health, I was in my small kitchen, developing a recipe for a healthy post-chemo snack bar. My phone buzzed, an unknown number flashing on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but my work with the hospital had taught me to always pick up. "Hello," I said, my voice distracted as I measured out oats. There was a long pause, filled with staticky breath. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years, yet would have recognized anywhere. But it was wrong. It was thin, strained, stripped of all its former confidence. "Alina," it rasped. My body went cold. Every sound in the world faded away except for that weak, broken voice on the other end of the line. "It's Ethan." Another pause, as if gathering the strength for the impossible ask. I need your help." The words hung in the air, surreal and utterly devastating. The man who had abandoned me at my most vulnerable was now reaching out from what sounded like the edge of his own abyss. But that's when karma stepped in, and his world started to crumble. The story tumbled out of him in broken fragments between coughs and labored breaths. He was sick, very sick, a rare, aggressive form of kidney failure. He'd been through the ringer, dialysis 3 times a week, his body slowly poisoning itself. The doctors had told him a transplant was his only real chance. His family had been tested. His new fiancée had been tested. No matches. They had exhausted the national registry, his rare tissue type making him a ghost in the system. He was running out of time. And then, in a final, desperate act, his doctor had suggested expanding the search to extended family and past partners. As he spoke, a cold, cruel sense of irony settled over me. The universe, it seemed, had a painfully literal sense of justice. The one person in the world he had deemed too broken, too sick, to stand by was now, according to medical science, a perfect genetic match. I was the 1 in a million chance. I was the key that could unlock the door to his survival. The man who left me to die was now begging me for a piece of my own, now healthy, body to keep himself alive. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, the half-made snack bars forgotten. I pulled up the email his doctor had sent, the one with the official cross-match results. There it was in stark, clinical black and white, compatible. The word seemed to pulse on the screen, charged with a lifetime of pain. My mind became a battlefield. One side screamed with the raw, wounded voice of the woman I had been, the woman he left alone in a cold bed, the woman who cried herself to sleep listening to the hum of a medical pump. That voice was furious, vindictive. It whispered that this was karma, pure and simple. Let him feel a fraction of the helplessness I felt. Let him understand what it's like to have your future depend on the mercy of someone who owes you nothing. But another voice, a calmer, stronger one that had been forged in my own recovery, also spoke. It asked what this decision would make me. Would saving him heal some part of my own old wounds, or would it simply be the ultimate act of self-betrayal? The universe had placed a terrible, poetic choice in my hands. Karma wasn't just happening to him, it was testing me. It was asking the woman I had become what she was made of. For 3 days, I was a ghost in my own life. The phone call had ripped open scars I thought had healed into faint, silvery lines. Now they bled fresh memories. I'd be washing a dish and suddenly be back in that sterile bathroom, watching my hair swirl down the drain, feeling the phantom weight of Ethan's disappointed gaze. I'd wake from a nap gasping, the echo of a single, relentless hospital monitor beep in my ears, a sound that had been the soundtrack to my absolute solitude. Why me? I whispered into the silence of my apartment, the same question that had haunted me during chemo. But the answer was no longer a mystery wrapped in self-pity. It was now a stark, simple truth. This was karma's final exam. It wasn't about his punishment, it was about my choice. The universe had handed me the ultimate power over the man who had made me feel utterly powerless. It was asking me to define my own healing. Was it found in wielding the power to deny him, or in discovering the strength to transcend the very need for that power? The ghosts of my past weren't just haunting me. They were standing as witnesses, waiting to see what the woman they forged would do. I didn't call him back. I just went. I needed to see him, not as a memory or a voice on the phone, but as a man. I walked into his hospital room, the familiar scent of antiseptic and despair triggering a visceral reaction in my gut. And there he was. Propped up on pillows, he looked small. The vibrant, confident man I had loved was gone, replaced by a pale, shrunken version, his skin tinged with a sickly yellow hue. Tubes snaked from his arm, and a machine hummed quietly beside him, doing the work his kidneys could not. When his eyes, dulled by pain and medication, focused on me, they widened in a mixture of shock and profound shame. He tried to sit up straighter, a pathetic attempt at reclaiming some dignity. He looked me up and down, taking in the healthy color in my cheeks, the strength in my posture, the life in my eyes. His own eyes welled with tears. "Alina," he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. You look alive." The observation was so simple, so stark, and it held a universe of regret. He was seeing the woman I had become without him, and it was a living indictment of his choice to leave. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of his oxygen. He gestured weakly to a chair, and I sat, my posture straight, my hands folded in my lap. I was a calm lake, and he was the stone struggling to make a ripple. "I was scared," he began, the words tumbling out as if he'd rehearsed them for this impossible moment. "I looked at you, at what the sickness was doing, and I saw my own mortality. I couldn't handle it. I was a coward." He was crying openly now, tears carving clean paths through the grime of his suffering. "I am so sorry." I listened, letting his apology hang in the sterile air between us. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer comfort. When he was finished, I met his watery gaze, my own eyes clear and steady. "I was scared too, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. "Every single day. I was terrified of the pain, of the unknown, of dying." I leaned forward slightly, not with aggression, but with a devastating finality. "The difference is, neither could I, but I didn't run." The truth of that statement settled over him, and he seemed to shrink even further into his pillows. His apology was for leaving. My response was a reminder that I had stayed and fought the battle he fled, and I had won. A few days later, a different visitor found me at my apartment. It was Sarah, his fiancée, the woman from the smiling photo. Up close, she was younger than I'd imagined, her face etched with a fear I knew all too well. She stood on my doorstep, wringing her hands. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "He's a good man. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he doesn't deserve to die for it." She was crying now, desperate. "I can't lose him. Please, Alina, I'm begging you." I looked at this woman, kneeling figuratively at my feet, pleading for the life of the man who had left me to face death alone. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. The new, healthy woman was begging the old, sick one for a piece of her vitality. I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt a deep, aching pity. She loved a version of Ethan that may never have truly existed, a man who could withstand a storm. I saw the ghost of my own naive self in her eyes. I didn't promise her anything. I just gently closed the door, leaving her sobs on the other side, another layer of complexity in an impossible situation. The following week was a sleepless purgatory. My phone rang incessantly. The transplant coordinator, his doctor, even his mother, her voice stripped of its former haughtiness, now just a mother's raw plea. Every ring was a fresh assault on my peace. I spent hours sitting in the quiet of my living room, the two versions of my life at war within me. The wounded Alina wielded the test results like a weapon, savoring the poetic justice. The healed Alina, the one who spoke to cancer survivors and advocated for strength, knew that true peace could never be built on a foundation of vengeance. This decision wasn't about who Ethan was or what he deserved. It was about who I was and what I deserved to carry forward. I deserved a soul free from the weight of having let someone die when I had the power to prevent it, even if that someone had once done the same to me. The choice became clear, not as a path of forgiveness, but as one of radical self-liberation. I would not allow his past cowardice to dictate my present character. I would donate, not for him, but for me. I would do it to prove to myself that my heart, though scarred, had not turned to stone. I would give him a kidney, and in doing so, I would give myself the gift of a conscience unburdened by his ghost. In the deep quiet of my apartment, with only the hum of the refrigerator keeping vigil, I sat at my kitchen table with a single sheet of paper before me. This wasn't an email to be deleted or a text to be forgotten. This required the permanence of ink, the deliberate slowness of handwriting. "Ethan," I began, the pen feeling both heavy and liberating in my hand. "I am writing this because some truths are too important to be spoken aloud in a room full of hospital sounds and unspoken history." I wrote not with the fiery anger of the betrayed wife, but with the calm, chilling clarity of a survivor. "Let me be perfectly clear. You do not deserve my help. You looked at me in my most vulnerable, terrifying moment, and you chose the path of least resistance, leaving me to navigate the valley of the shadow of death alone. That is an immutable fact of our history. I could feel the ghosts of those lonely nights watching me write. This decision I am making is not an absolution of your past. It is not a declaration that all is forgiven. It is, instead, a radical act of self-preservation. I have fought too hard to rebuild my life from the ashes of illness and abandonment to now allow the poison of bitterness to take root in my newly healthy body. I deserve a soul unburdened by the weight of your potential death, even if you once felt no such obligation toward mine. This kidney is not a gift to you. It is my final release from you." I signed my name with a firm, clean stroke, sealing the envelope with a sense of profound closure. This letter was my terms of surrender, not to him, but to the war that had raged inside me for years. The transplant coordinator's office was bathed in sterile, fluorescent light. Brenda, the coordinator, sat across from me, her expression a careful blend of professionalism and deep humanity. She slid the final consent form across the polished table. "Alina," I need to ask you one more time, for the record, and for your own peace of mind. You are voluntarily consenting to this procedure, understanding all the associated risks, without any form of coercion or promise of compensation. I looked at the document, at the blank line waiting for my signature. It represented a point of no return, not just for Ethan, but for the woman I had become. My mind didn't race with doubts. Instead, it settled into a profound stillness. This was not about being the bigger person. It was about being my own person. Signing this was the ultimate declaration that my life, my choices, and my peace were no longer reactions to his betrayal, but actions born of my own hard-won strength. It is a necessity, I repeated, my voice even and sure. I picked up the pen. The scratch of the ballpoint on the paper was the loudest sound in the world. In that moment, I wasn't giving him a kidney. I was giving myself the freedom to walk away from his ghost forever. I was severing the karmic tie with a signature, not a scream. Little did he know, the only person who could save him was the one he left to die. Lying on the gurney as I was wheeled into the operating room felt like the most surreal pilgrimage. The air was cold, smelling sharply of antiseptic and ozone. The massive, circular surgical light above the table looked like a mechanical sun, blinding and impersonal. As the nurses transferred me with practiced efficiency onto the cold table, a strange detachment settled over me. This body of mine, which had been a battlefield, a prison, and then a temple of recovery, was now becoming an altar of sacrifice. But it was a sacrifice I was willingly making for my own salvation, not his. The anesthesiologist, a calm presence behind his mask, explained the process as he adjusted the IV. You're going to feel a cool sensation, and then you'll just drift off. As the medication entered my bloodstream, a wave of warmth and weightlessness washed over me. The sharp edges of the world softened. My last conscious thought was not a prayer for a successful surgery, but a release, a final offering to the universe. Let this physical pain be the last echo of the old pain. Let the cutting of my flesh be the final severing of that toxic cord. Let this act mean something far beyond his life. Let it mean my complete and total liberation. The light above me dissolved into a brilliant, welcoming white, and I let go completely. Consciousness returned not as a sudden jolt, but as a slow, heavy tide rolling onto a distant shore. The first thing I was aware of was a deep, grinding ache in my right side, a raw, foundational pain that anchored me to my body. I heard the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, a sound that once symbolized my loneliness, but now simply marked my presence in the world. A nurse's face swam into view, her eyes crinkling above her mask. Welcome back, Alina. You're in the recovery room. The surgery was a complete success. She paused, placing a gentle hand on my arm. And the recipient is stable. The new kidney is producing urine already. It's working. The news landed not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a quiet, seismic shift in the geology of my soul. He was alive. Because a part of me, a part I had chosen to give, was now sustaining him. I waited for the storm of emotion, the resentment, the pride, the fury, but there was only a vast, expansive silence. It was the silence of a house after a haunting has finally been exorcised. The weight was gone. The boulder of bitterness I had carried for years had been surgically removed. The physical pain was acute, but it was a clean, honest pain that would fade with time. The other pain, the old, festering wound of his abandonment, had been scooped out, and in its place was a hollow space already filling with a profound and peaceful lightness. His visit to my room a few days later was a study in shattered pride. He moved tentatively, his body hunched over a walker, his face pale and etched with a pain that was more than physical. He stood at the foot of my bed, unable to fully meet my gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor as if looking for the right words there. Alina, he began, his voice a broken thing. I don't have the language for this, what you've done. How can I possibly thank you? How do I repay a debt for my very life? He finally looked up, and in his eyes I saw the full, crushing weight of his regret. He wasn't just grateful, he was morally bankrupt before me, and he knew it. I studied him, this man I had once loved, whose smile could once light up my world, now reduced to a trembling supplicant. I felt no vengeance, only a distant, clear-eyed pity. You can't, Ethan, I said, my voice quiet but absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. There is no debt, there is no transaction. This was not a loan. I took a slow, careful breath, the stitches in my side pulling gently. The only thing you can do with this second chance is to live. Not just exist, but truly live. Be a better man than the one who walked out of that hospital room years ago. Let your life, from this day forward, be a testament to the grace you were shown, not the fear you once succumbed to. That is the only thing that could ever give any of this meaning." He nodded, a sob catching in his throat, understanding at last that my gift was so complete it had rendered him forever in my debt, and that was a sentence he would have to learn to live with. The morning I was discharged, the sun streamed into my room with a cheerful indifference to the monumental shift that had occurred within those walls. I moved slowly, carefully, my body a delicate ecosystem of healing incisions and weary muscles. I had given explicit instructions to the nursing staff that I did not want to be notified when Ethan was discharged. Our story, the one that began with vows and ended with a visceral, physical severance, needed no final scene. As I gathered my few belongings, I looked around the room that had been my cocoon for this final transformation. There were no tears, no lingering glances, no need for a dramatic farewell. The most powerful goodbyes are often the quietest ones, the ones that happen not with words, but with a simple turning away, a conscious uncoupling of energies. I walked out of the hospital doors alone, just as I had walked in, but this time, the solitude felt like a companion, not a punishment. I didn't need closure from him. The surgery had been my closure. The act of giving had been my final word. Some stories aren't meant to end with a period, but with a quiet, peaceful exhale into the rest of your life. In the months that followed, I didn't just recover, I evolved. The hollow space left inside me, once occupied by grief and then by his kidney, began to fill with a new purpose. I used my settlement money not for a lavish vacation, but to fund my travels to cancer support conferences and wellness retreats. I stood before rooms of women whose eyes mirrored the same hollow fear I had once seen in my own reflection. I showed them my scars, the one on my side from the surgery and the invisible ones etched on my soul. "These don't mean you're broken," I would tell them, my voice strong and clear. "They are proof that you survived the fire. They are the map of a battle you fought and won. Your strength isn't the absence of fear or pain, it's the decision to keep walking through it, even when you're walking alone." I wasn't just sharing my story, I was building a ladder for other women to climb out of their own despair. My pain had been transformed into a purpose that was larger than myself, and in that purpose, I found a version of Alina I could never have become without the heartbreak. I was in a coffee shop in a small coastal town when I saw it. A national newspaper was left on a nearby table, and a headline in the lifestyle section caught my eye. "Anonymous donor saves local man in miracle match." I didn't need to read the article to know it was about us. The story described a man, given a second chance at life by a stranger, a guardian angel who asked for nothing in return. The world read it and called it a medical marvel, a heartwarming tale of human generosity. I took a slow sip of my tea, a faint, knowing smile touching my lips. They saw a miracle. I saw karma, not the loud, vengeful kind, but the quiet, poetic kind that works in perfect, intricate circles. It wasn't a story about an angel, it was a story about a choice. And in the exquisite silence of my anonymity, I felt the final, satisfying click of a story reaching its rightful, peaceful conclusion. Nearly 2 years later, a business article crossed my desk. I was vetting potential organizations for a partnership with my new wellness nonprofit. One name stood out: the Vargas Resilience Foundation. My maiden name. My heart stuttered. I clicked the link. There was Ethan's name, listed as the founder. The foundation's mission was to provide financial and emotional support to individuals and their families navigating long-term illness. The literature quoted him saying, "I was given a second chance, and this foundation is my commitment to ensuring others don't have to fight their battles alone." He had never used my name. He had never gone public with our story. This was his silent, enduring apology etched not in words, but in action. It was his attempt to live the better life I had challenged him to live. It wasn't a grand, romantic gesture. It was a quiet atonement, and in its own way, it was the most meaningful form of thanks he could have ever offered. I found myself back at the same hospital, not as a patient or a visitor, but as a guest speaker for a fundraiser for the oncology ward. As I stood at the podium in the brightly lit auditorium, I looked out at the faces in the crowd: doctors, nurses, survivors, and their families. The same lights that had once felt so cold and clinical now felt like a spotlight on how far I had come. I spoke about resilience, about the choices we make in our darkest hours, and about the freedom that comes from releasing the past. I didn't mention Ethan's name or the surgery. That part of the story was mine alone. As I spoke, I realized the profound truth. I hadn't saved him to be remembered or to play the hero in his narrative. I had saved him so I could finally, completely move on with my own. The circle was complete. The sick woman had become the healer. The abandoned wife had become the savior. And in that transformation, I had found a peace that no amount of revenge could ever have provided. And that's when the twist hit. Love wasn't the cure he expected. It was the lesson he never saw coming. I stand here now, years later, looking at the woman I've become in the mirror. She has laugh lines around her eyes that weren't there before, and a quiet strength in her gaze that can only be earned, not given. People often ask me, in whispers, if I ever regret my choice. They think the ultimate revenge would have been to let fate take its course, to allow the natural consequences of his actions to unfold. But they misunderstand what real power is. Sometimes, karma doesn't strike with thunder and lightning. It whispers through the quiet act of healing. It doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes, it looks like a second chance offered by the very hands that were once left empty. I thought for a long time that revenge meant watching him suffer as I had suffered, that victory would be measured in his pain. But I was wrong. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, isn't about them at all. It's about you. It's about looking at your own reflection and seeing someone who refused to be diminished by another's cruelty. When life gives you the ultimate power to destroy someone who hurt you, and you consciously, deliberately choose peace instead, that's when you've truly won. Not against them, but for yourself. That choice to donate my kidney wasn't about him. It was the final, definitive proof that his actions no longer controlled my character. My heart, though scarred, was still capable of a grace he never showed me. And in that grace, I found a freedom more intoxicating than any schadenfreude. They tried to break me. Instead, they taught me how to build myself into someone unbreakable. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful revenge of all. The Karma Diaries.